Göbekli Tepe. The year is 9600 BCE. Agriculture has not been invented. The wheel does not exist. Writing is 6,000 years away. Every human being alive is a hunter-gatherer moving across frozen plains in search of meat, sleeping under skins, building nothing that lasts longer than a season. And yet here, on a barren hilltop in what is now southeastern Turkey, someone is cutting limestone pillars the height of 2 men stacked on each other's shoulders and carving lions into them with tools made of flint. Not scratching them, carving them, with depth, with shadow, with anatomical precision. Someone is building a cathedral before they have built a house. That is Göbekli Tepe. And the moment you understand what it is, the official story of human civilization starts to come apart at the seams. A Kurdish shepherd named Şafak Yıldız noticed an unusual stone protruding from the ground in 1994. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute came to look, stayed for 20 years, and never fully recovered from what he found. What he uncovered was not a grave, not a settlement, not a battlefield. It was a temple, the oldest temple on Earth by a margin of 6,000 years. Radiocarbon dating by Schmidt's team places the oldest construction layers at 9600 to 8200 BCE, making Göbekli Tepe at least 11,600 years old. Stonehenge is a child compared to this. The Great Pyramid of Giza is practically modern. The T-shaped limestone pillars stand up to 5.5 meters tall and weigh between 10 and 20 metric tons each. They are arranged in concentric rings, and they are covered in carvings, lions, foxes, vultures, scorpions, and abstract symbols that no one has fully deciphered. The quarry where the stone was cut lies between 100 and 500 meters from the site, and there is no evidence of wheeled transport, no evidence of draft animals, no evidence of any of the things we assume are necessary to move 20 tons of rock up a hill. Yet the pillars are there, and they are precise. Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone, caught the attention of researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis of the University of Edinburgh, who published an analysis in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry in 2017, arguing that the carvings represent a star map recording a comet impact event around 10,950 BCE, a date that aligns with the onset of the Younger Dryas, the catastrophic cooling event that nearly ended human civilization after the last ice age. If they are right, whoever built Göbekli Tepe was not just making art, they were recording an apocalypse. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed at least 16 additional ring structures still buried beneath the hill, meaning the site covering roughly 9 hectares is only about 5% excavated. 0 domestic animal bones and 0 grain remnants have ever been found in any layer. This was not a settlement. It was visited, maintained, and used as a ritual gathering point by mobile groups spread across a vast region. And then, when they were finished with it, they filled it in. Not by erosion, not by time, by human hands. Layer after layer of clean stone rubble, animal bones, and flint tools deposited deliberately, methodically, over what Schmidt estimated was multiple generations. Someone chose to bury the oldest temple on Earth on purpose. Mainstream archaeologists interpret this as ritual closure, a sacred act of preservation practiced by cultures that interred holy spaces rather than abandoning them. The deliberate infill, they argue, protected the site from desecration and honored its spiritual significance. It is a reasonable explanation. It is even a beautiful one. But ritual closure does not explain the engineering required. Filling 9 hectares of megalithic architecture with rubble is not a religious gesture. It is an infrastructure project requiring the same coordinated, multi-generational labor as building the complex in the first place. And here is what the textbooks tend to move past quickly. Almost immediately after Göbekli Tepe was buried, in the same region, agriculture appears for the first time in human history. The oldest domesticated wheat strains have been genetically traced to the slopes of a mountain 30 kilometers away. Some researchers ask whether the sequence runs backwards from what we assume. What if Göbekli Tepe didn't arise from civilization? What if it created it? What if the organizational demands of maintaining a sacred complex of this scale were the pressure that forced hunter-gatherers to settle, to farm, to build communities? And if that is true, the burial becomes darker. Not a celebration of completion, but a termination. When whatever the temple offered was no longer needed, or when something made its continuation impossible, they sealed it shut, permanently, as if what was inside was not meant to be used again. What exactly was inside we may never fully know, but 95% of it is still down there, under the hill, waiting. From that buried temple, we descend into water, into the wreck of a Roman cargo ship, and the object that was pulled from the sea floor and nearly catalogued as scrap. The Antikythera mechanism. It is 1901. A team of Greek sponge divers sheltering from a storm near the tiny island of Antikythera slip below the surface and discover a shipwreck on the seafloor. They bring up bronze statues, marble figures, glassware, the standard contents of a wealthy Roman vessel. Then one of them surfaces with a lump of corroded bronze the size of a shoebox, green and fused with rock. It is set aside, stored, largely ignored for 2 years. Then it falls off a shelf in an Athens museum, cracks open, and inside, visible to anyone who looks, are gear wheels. Interlocked, calibrated, unmistakably mechanical gear wheels. In a 2,000-year-old shipwreck. That is the Antikythera mechanism. And what it implies about the ancient world is still being processed by the scientific community more than a century later. Archaeologist Valerio Stais noticed the gearing in 1902, but the device was largely dismissed as a navigational instrument of some kind. It was not until physicist Derek de Solla Price of Yale University began a serious investigation in the 1950s that the true scale of the problem became clear. His landmark 1974 paper, Gears from the Greeks, established that this was not a compass, not an astrolabe, not a simple instrument. It was an analog computer. In 2006, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project used advanced polynomial texture mapping and computed tomography scanning to read inscriptions previously invisible beneath the corrosion. What they found changed the assessment again. The device contains at least 37 interlocking bronze gears. The front dial tracked the solar year and the zodiac. The back dials tracked a 19-year metonic cycle, the period after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same calendar dates, and a 223-month Saros cycle for predicting eclipses. Each of those 223 cells on the Saros dial is marked with a glyph indicating whether the predicted eclipse is solar or lunar, and whether it will be visible from a given location. This is not navigation equipment. This is science. A 2021 paper by Tony Freeth and his team at University College London, published in Scientific Reports, proposed that the front panel also displayed the motion of all 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, each driven by its own dedicated gear train. The inscription on the back cover, partially decoded by the same team, appears to be a user manual. The ship carrying the device has been dated to approximately 60 to 70 BCE. The mechanism is believed to predate the wreck by 50 to 100 years based on inscription analysis. and the next comparable mechanical complexity in the entire archaeological record does not appear until the clock towers of medieval Europe around 1300 CE. That is a gap of 1400 years during which this technology simply does not exist anywhere. The mainstream explanation, now broadly accepted, is that the mechanism represents the pinnacle of Hellenistic Greek astronomical engineering, a tradition connected to the island of Rhodes, possibly to the great astronomer Hipparchus. The knowledge was real, the craftsmanship was Greek, and the gap is explained by catastrophic loss. The Roman conquests, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the severing of the intellectual traditions that made the device possible in the first place. But a 1400-year gap is not a gap. It is an erasure. The Romans who were transporting that ship were the most sophisticated engineers of the ancient world. They built aqueducts, domes, and harbors of hydraulic concrete. If they encountered a working mechanical computer, they would have copied it. They would have improved it. They would have described it in text. No Roman writer mentions anything like the Antikythera mechanism. No Byzantine manuscript refers to its principles. It is as if the device was not recognized for what it was by the people who were carrying it, as if those who could have read it were already gone by the time the ship sailed. Some researchers ask whether the mechanism was itself a recovered artifact rather than a contemporary one, already ancient, already orphaned from its explanatory tradition, being transported by people who knew it was valuable without fully understanding why. And if one device of this complexity could exist and then vanish without trace, the question becomes uncomfortable. What else was out there, still sitting on the seafloor, corroding into illegibility at 60 meters depth, found by no one? The ocean covers most of the ancient world's trade routes. The Antikythera wreck was discovered by accident by divers hiding from weather. There is no reason to believe it was unique. There is every reason to wonder what we have not yet found. From the Mediterranean seafloor, we travel to the high deserts of South America, where the dead were left to dry in the open air for thousands of years, and where some of the skulls they left behind do not fit any anatomy textbook ever written. The Paracas elongated skulls picture a mother 2,000 years ago on the coast of Peru. She is wrapping her newborn skull in cloth, pressing flat boards against the soft bone, applying steady pressure day after day, year after year. She is not trying to hurt her child. She is trying to make her child look like the gods, like the rulers, like the beings at the top of her world. The practice was real, the love behind it was real, and the result, an elongated cone of bone reaching upward from the skull, was the highest status symbol her culture knew. That much most archaeologists agree on. What they cannot agree on is this: some of those skulls are too large to have been shaped by any board, and some of them have anatomy that simply does not appear in any human medical literature. Peruvian archaeologist Julio C. Tello excavated the Paracas necropolis beginning in 1928, uncovering over 300 mummified individuals wrapped in extraordinary textiles, among the finest ever produced in the ancient world. Many had dramatically elongated skulls, and Tello categorized them as artificially deformed, consistent with the cradleboarding practice documented across dozens of cultures globally. The skulls were largely stored in Peruvian museums and left to the archaeologists to interpret. It was not until researcher Brian Forster began systematic morphological analysis in the 2010s, followed by DNA sampling sent to a laboratory in 2013 and 14, that the controversy reignited. Here is the biological problem. Normal artificial cranial deformation changes the shape of the skull, but does not increase its volume. The total amount of bone material stays the same. You are redistributing it, not creating more. Binding forces bone to grow in a different direction. It does not produce additional neural tissue. Several Paracas specimens, however, show cranial volumes measuring between 25 and 30% larger than the average modern human skull. The average adult human cranial capacity is approximately 1,350 cubic centimeters. Some Paracas specimens appear to exceed 1,600 cubic centimeters. You cannot board press your way to an additional 250 cubic centimeters of brain matter. The physics do not allow it. Additionally, several specimens appear to show a single, undivided parietal plate where normal human anatomy has two parietal bones separated by the sagittal suture, the seam running along the top of the skull. You cannot compress a suture out of existence. Either it is there or it is not. In some Paracas specimens, according to the morphological analyses conducted, it is not. Forster arranged for hair, skin, tooth, and bone samples from 5 Paracas skulls to be sent to a laboratory for mitochondrial DNA analysis. The lab director's report, shared publicly but never published in a peer-reviewed journal, stated that the samples showed mutations in the haplogroup sequences that the analyst could not match to any known Native American, European, or Asian genetic lineage. One sample, the report noted, was so distinct from any cataloged haplogroup that the analyst described it as potentially representing a branch of the human family unknown to modern science. These results have not been independently replicated. No accredited institution has run a counter-study. They have not been refuted. They have been ignored, which is a different thing entirely. Ancient Egyptian depictions of Pharaoh Akhenaten and his daughters from the 14th century BCE consistently show unnaturally elongated skulls. The Huns, who swept across Europe in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, practiced skull binding. The Mangbetu people of the Congo did it. The Chinook tribes of North America did it. We are looking at cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all of them deciding that the shape of royalty, of divinity, of supreme human form was an elongated cylindrical head. Anthropologist John Verano of Tulane University, who has spent decades studying Andean cranial modification, attributes the volume anomaly to genetic predisposition combined with very early deformation, beginning in infancy when the skull is most plastic. The parietal variation, where acknowledged, falls within the range of rare developmental differences in human anatomy. These are reasonable scientific positions, and they deserve to be heard. But the question some researchers keep returning to is not how the shape was achieved. It is why the shape was chosen. Across every continent, across cultures that had no documented contact with each other, the elite looked up at whatever sat at the top of their social order and decided the defining feature was a long head. Some researchers ask whether they were imitating something they had actually seen. And if so, what were they looking at? In Siberia, frozen under the Altai Mountains for 50,000 years, something else was looking back at us. Something we did not even know existed until 14 years ago. The Denisovan bracelet. In 2008, a finger bone was recovered from layer 11 of Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. In 2010, Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology ran a DNA analysis and published the result in Nature. The bone belonged to a human species that no one had ever identified before. Not Neanderthal, not Homo sapiens, something else entirely. They called it Denisovan, after the cave. We have known it existed for just 15 years. And from that same layer 11, recovered in the same excavation, came a piece of jewelry so technically precise that a modern jeweler who examined it said it looked like it had been made with a lathe. That is the Denisovan bracelet. and what it implies is still being quietly processed by the paleoanthropology community. The bracelet is carved from chloridolite, a green stone not found in the immediate vicinity of Denisova Cave, meaning its maker either traded for the material or traveled significant distances to obtain it. That alone implies a cognitive and social framework well beyond what we assumed for 50,000-year-old hominins. But the manufacturing evidence is what stops researchers cold. The bracelet contains a perfectly circular 8 mm diameter hole drilled through it with such precision that Anatoly Derevienko's analysis, published in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2015, concluded the drilling required a high-speed rotary tool. The interior surface of the hole shows thread marks consistent with a rotating drill bit moving at sustained speed, not the back-and-forth scraping motion of any known Paleolithic technique. The bracelet's outer surface has been polished to a specular finish. It reflects light, a quality that Derevienko attributed to a leather buffing process considered a Neolithic innovation, appearing in the broader archaeological record some 30,000 to 40,000 years later. The sediment layer from which both the bracelet and the finger bone were recovered has been dated by optically stimulated luminescence to between 50,000 and 65,000 years ago. Here is what makes that number catastrophic for the conventional timeline. High-speed rotary drilling as a concept does not reappear in the archaeological record for another 40,000 years. And when it does reappear, it does not come with a preamble. It comes fully formed in multiple cultures as if being remembered rather than invented. The Denisovans were apparently doing it in the middle of the Paleolithic. Then they stopped. Then nobody did it again for 40 millennia. The Denisovan genome, further refined in a 2012 science paper by Pabo's team, revealed something else. Modern Melanesians carry approximately 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. Aboriginal Australians carry a similar proportion. Certain Tibetan populations carry a specific Denisovan gene variant called EPAS1, identified in a 2014 Nature study by Nielsen and colleagues, which confers measurable physiological advantages at high altitude and almost certainly help those populations survive on the Tibetan plateau. The Denisovans are not just a laboratory curiosity. They are in us, still doing things for us 50,000 years later. In 2019, a jawbone found in Tibet's Baishia Karst cave at an altitude of 3,300 meters was identified as Denisovan by Chen and colleagues in Nature, extending the known range of this species from Siberia to the roof of the world. A species with a range that large, that adaptive, that capable of surviving at the extremes of the planet does not leave only a finger bone, a bracelet, and a jawbone in the fossil record. It leaves whatever it built, wherever it built it. The bracelet we found. We do not yet know what else is down there. Mainstream paleoanthropologists accept the bracelet as genuine and extraordinary. The standard position is that Denisovans were cognitively more sophisticated than previously understood, capable of independent innovation that in this specific instance happened to anticipate technologies developed much later elsewhere. It was not transmitted, it died with them. But an isolated innovation that produces results we do not see again for 40,000 years is not an answer. It is a restatement of the problem. Because knowledge of that kind, rotational mechanics, sustained drilling, surface polish, once understood, tends to spread. Every culture in history that discovered the wheel found a use for rotation within a generation. Why did no neighbor of the Denisovans, in any direction, for any purpose, over any stretch of time, carry this forward? Some researchers simply ask how much of what the Denisovans made and knew we will never find, because it was organic, or underwater, or in places no one has dug yet. We know this species from a handful of fragments. The bracelet is the loudest thing they left us, and it is saying something we are not yet equipped to hear. From the frozen caves of Siberia, we move into the oldest cities humanity ever built, where a civilization left behind dozens of clay figures. They are nursing infants. They have the faces of lizards. And no one in the 5,000 years of civilization that followed ever wrote down what they were. The Ubaid lizard people figurines stand in a museum in London and look at a clay figurine under glass. It is 6,000 years old, give or take. It comes from the culture that built the world's first cities, gave us the wheel, the plow, the arch, and the written word. Civilization as a concept starts here, and the figure holding an infant to its chest, in the posture that every human culture from every era uses to depict a nursing mother, has the head of a lizard. Elongated snout, flattened skull, coffee bean eyes pressed into either side of a reptilian face. She is not snarling, she is not threatening, she is feeding a child, and she has at least 100 siblings spread across a dozen excavation sites in ancient Iraq, and not one civilization that came after them left a single word explaining what they are. The Ubaid culture, roughly 6,500 to 3,800 BCE, is the foundation layer of Mesopotamian civilization, the direct cultural ancestor of the Sumerians. The first excavations at Tel al-Ubaid near Ur were conducted by Henry Hall of the British Museum in 1919, with subsequent work at Eridu and Arpachaya. The reptilian-headed figurines emerged from multiple independent sites across a wide geographic area. They come in male and female forms. They appear in standing, seated, and nursing postures. Over 120 of them have been cataloged across at least 6 separate excavation sites, establishing this not as a local quirk, but as a deliberate, widespread, persistent tradition lasting over 1,000 years. The Ubaid culture predates Sumerian writing by more than 1,000 years. That means the people who made these figures left no text explaining them. They left only the figures themselves. And what the figures show is consistent enough across sites and centuries to rule out accident. The elongated skull, the slit eyes, the reptilian features are not stylistic variation. They are the point. What makes this particularly difficult to dismiss is what the nursing posture means in ancient art. Across the entire span of human visual culture, the nursing pose is used for one of 3 things: depicting actual mothers, depicting fertility goddesses, or depicting divine royal lineages. It is never used for monsters. It is never used for threatening supernatural beings. Wherever the nursing pose appears, the being depicted is understood as nurturing, powerful, and central to the social order. Whatever the Ubaid people were depicting in these figures, they were not afraid of them. They revered them. Archaeologist Seton Lloyd, who excavated at Eridu in the 1940s and 1950s, noted that the figurines were unlike any other prehistoric anthropomorphic tradition in the region, and that the reptilian features could not be attributed to stylistic convention. The same culture depicted animals with naturalistic accuracy, which makes the consistent departure from human anatomy in the figurines even more striking. Here is what the mainstream position offers. The figures are ritual objects connected to a fertility or ancestor cult. The reptilian features may represent a mask worn in ceremony, an animistic deity with specific animal attributes, or a convention that was deeply meaningful in Ubaid context, but has no surviving explanatory text. It is a reasonable interpretation, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But stylistic conventions leave evidence. They leave names, temples, priesthoods, references in successor cultures. The Sumerians, who built their civilization directly on top of Ubaid sites, produced one of the richest mythological traditions in the ancient world. They named their gods, described their appearances, and detailed their behavior across thousands of clay tablets. Not one of those tablets mentions anything resembling the figures. Not one Akkadian or Babylonian text in any archive refers back to them. The Sumerians inherited the cities, the sites, the sacred locations, and then apparently forgot whatever the figures represented so completely that even myth carries no trace of it. Some researchers noticed the timing. The lizard figures are prolific from 6500 to 3800 BCE. Writing appears around 3200 BCE. In the gap between those two dates, the reptilian iconography vanishes, and in its place, a pantheon of fully human-shaped gods appears in the first written mythology in history. Some researchers ask whether that transition was organic evolution or something more deliberate. When you have the authority to write the first words of human recorded history, you also have the authority to decide what came before them. And whoever wrote the Sumerian creation myths apparently decided that whatever the nursing lizard figures had been, it was not something worth remembering in writing. That may be the most disturbing possibility of all. Not that these figures depict something alien or ancient or impossible, but that they depict something real, something that was known and named and central to the world's first civilization, and then was deliberately, carefully, completely written out of the record the moment the record began. In China, the same impulse to erase may have operated on a different scale entirely. Not figures, but entire rooms. The Longyu Caves. In 1992, a farmer named Wu Anai lived next to a pond in Zhejiang province that his village had always used for fishing. For reasons he has never fully explained, curiosity, instinct, some impulse he cannot name, he decided to pump it dry. It took 17 days. When the water was gone, he did not find a pond bottom. He found a doorway carved into stone. He lit a torch and stepped inside. The ceiling soared above him. The walls were covered, every surface, in parallel chisel marks, spaced at consistent intervals, angled at consistent degrees, running across stone in all directions like the interior of a machine. He was standing in an engineered cavern the size of a cathedral, and there were at least 23 more of them, side by side beneath the villages and hills of Longyu County. Not one line of text in 5,000 years of Chinese history mentions any of them. The Chinese Academy of Sciences investigated. The chambers are not natural formations. The largest individual cavern measures approximately 170 meters in length with a ceiling height of up to 30 meters. The 24 known caves cover a total area of approximately 30,000 square meters, connected by carved doorways at consistent heights, with support pillars positioned at geometrically regular intervals. Their placement implies pre-construction planning, not opportunistic quarrying. The scale of stone removal is estimated at over 1 million cubic meters. No spoil heap corresponding to that volume has ever been located anywhere in the surrounding geography. The stone went somewhere. No one knows where. Every wall and ceiling surface bears the same parallel chisel mark pattern, angled at approximately 45 degrees, spaced at consistent intervals, maintained across the entire complex with a uniformity that several Chinese engineers who studied the site described as implying either extraordinary cultural discipline or some form of tool-guiding apparatus. This is not the mark of a quarry. Quarries follow the most efficient fracture planes of the rock, varying their approach based on the stone's natural geometry. The Longyu pattern does the opposite. It imposes a consistent, labor-intensive geometry on every surface regardless of what the stone wants to do. Someone chose to carve every room in the same repeating pattern. That is not extraction, that is intentionality. And yet China has the world's oldest continuous written historical tradition. The Qin dynasty, which unified China in 221 BCE, ran one of the most administratively comprehensive governments in the ancient world. They counted people, tracked grain, documented public works. The Han dynasty that followed them documented everything, every canal, every wall, every mine. The Tang, the Song, the Ming, thousands of years of bureaucratic record. Not one administration, not one local magistrate, not one provincial tax record, not one poem or legend from any dynasty in any province makes a single reference to 30,000 square meters of engineered underground space. Mainstream Chinese archaeologists tentatively classify the caves as ancient quarries or storage facilities, likely predating the Qin dynasty. The chisel mark pattern is interpreted as a carving technique rather than a decorative program, and the absence from written records is attributed to the loss of local administrative documents over millennia, or to the possibility that the caves were constructed before comprehensive record-keeping reached this region. But Qin-era record-keeping was not local. It was imperial. Projects of this scale were tracked centrally as matters of state economy and labor management. 1 million cubic meters of stone removal represents a labor force of tens of thousands sustained over years or decades. That does not disappear from the historical record by accident. It disappears by decision. Some researchers point out the parallel with Göbekli Tepe, a site of vast scale, engineered with evident purpose, deliberately voided of datable material, and scrubbed from the memory of every civilization that came after it. Both sites were sealed. Both were emptied. Both vanished from the record of the societies that inherited the territory above them. Whatever the Longyu caves were for, whoever used them, they were made to be forgotten. And for over 2,000 years, they were. The caves have not been fully mapped. Further chambers are suspected beneath adjacent hills, still flooded, still undiscovered. We found 24 rooms. We do not know how many more are waiting for the water to be pumped out. From underground silence, we move to the surface, to the open sky of the Peruvian desert, where the next impossible thing is so large it hid in plain sight for decades. The Nazca Lines. From the ground, you see nothing unusual. Stones, gravel, the flat reddish-brown surface of the Peruvian desert stretching in every direction. You could walk across the Nazca Plateau for a week and notice nothing except the heat and the silence. Now imagine you are in a small aircraft, banking east at 300 meters altitude. Beneath you, a hummingbird materializes, 96 meters from beak to tail, its wings swept back with anatomical accuracy, its body proportioned correctly for the species. You bank north, a spider appears, 46 meters across, its 8 legs arranged in a geometric pattern that took researchers decades to realize may encode the structure of the spider's reproductive organ, a detail invisible to the naked eye on a living spider without magnification. Then a condor, a monkey, a whale, a tree, all of them enormous, all of them perfect, all of them visible only from above. And all of them made by a culture that, according to every record we have, never left the ground. The Nazca Lines have been known to low-flying Peruvian male pilots since the 1920s, but were first studied scientifically by German mathematician Maria Ricci, who dedicated 40 years of her life to mapping and protecting them beginning in the 1940s. Paul Kosak of Long Island University, flying over the region in 1941, called Nazca the largest astronomy book in the world. But the full scale of what is out there was not understood until 2019, when a joint Japanese-Peruvian research team from Yamagata University, led by archaeologist Masato Sakai, announced the discovery of 143 previously unknown geoglyphs using drone photogrammetry and deep learning image analysis. 143 new figures, after a century of research, still hiding. The lines are made by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated surface pebbles to reveal the yellowish ground beneath, then piling the removed material in low borders along the edges. It is a simple technique. What is not simple is the precision with which it was executed. The longest individual line runs perfectly straight for approximately 14.5 kilometers across terrain that includes hills, gullies, and geological faults deviating by less than 0.5% from a true straight line. Maria Reiche's lifetime measurements, compiled in her 1968 monograph, Mystery on the Desert, documented over 800 individual straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 animal and plant designs. Maintaining that precision over kilometers of irregular ground without aerial observation to correct errors requires a scaling system, grid coordinates, scale drawings, rope and stake geometry that the Nazca demonstrably understood but whose instruments have never been found. Carbon dating of wooden stakes at the ends of some lines gives dates of approximately 400 to 650 CE. Marcus Reindel's work at the adjacent Palpa site has identified earlier Paracas period figures dating to roughly 400 BCE, suggesting the tradition spans over 1,000 years and multiple cultures. The most widely accepted academic interpretation, developed by anthropologist Johann Reinhard and supported by the majority of Peruvian archaeologists, is that the lines served as ritual pathways connected to water and mountain worship. The Nazca people walked them during ceremonies. The trapezoids served as gathering spaces. The animal figures were large-scale prayers addressed to sky deities who the Nazca believed could look down from above. Reinhard's research, published in National Geographic Research in 1985, links many of the line's orientations to water sources, hills where rainfall collects, seasonal river paths, the hydraulic geography of a desert people's survival. But the 2019 discovery of 143 additional figures complicates the walking interpretation. Some of the newly discovered designs are as small as 5 meters, identifiable only from drone altitude and invisible from any ground position. You cannot walk a ritual path you cannot see from the ground. You cannot use as a gathering space a figure too small to stand inside. Those figures were not made to be walked. They were made to be seen from above, which means whoever made them understood they would be seen from above. Some researchers ask what the Nazca were looking at when they drew these designs, not the finished product, which they could not see, but the scale reference they were working from. Scale drawing on that level implies a cartographic and geometric tradition that the burial sites of the Nazca have not yet yielded evidence of. Others ask whether the sheer range of scales, from 5-meter figures to 300-meter birds, implies different periods, different functions, different intended audiences. And if some of these figures were addressed to beings looking down from altitude, the question that follows is unavoidable. What did the Nazca people believe was up there? From the open desert, we move to a closed room in a library at Yale University, where the most analyzed and most impenetrable text in the history of human writing has been sitting in a glass case for over a century, and no one on earth can read a single word of it. The Voynich manuscript. In 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich was sorting through a collection of manuscripts at the Villa Mondragone near Rome when he pulled out a book unlike anything he had encountered. It was handwritten on vellum, illustrated in faded colors, and written from cover to cover in a script he did not recognize. He showed it to the finest linguistic minds of his generation. Nobody could read it. He died not knowing what it said. Over the century that followed, it defeated 2 world wars' worth of military cryptographers, a team of NSA analysts during the Cold War, and in 2019, the most advanced natural language processing AI systems available. The Voynich manuscript is the most analyzed unknown text in the history of human writing. Not one word has ever been confirmed decoded. The earliest documented record of the manuscript is a 1639 letter from Bohemian scholar Georg Baresch to the Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher, describing a mysterious illustrated book that Baresch had spent years trying to decipher without success, establishing that the mystery was already over 270 years old before Voynich found it. In 2009, Yale University submitted samples to the University of Arizona Radiocarbon Facility. Results published in the journal Radiocarbon in 2011 dated the vellum to 1404 to 1438 CE. The manuscript is real. The parchment is genuinely medieval. It contains approximately 240 pages of handwritten text in an unknown script composed of 20 to 30 distinct characters accompanied by illustrations in several distinct sections. The botanical section depicts plants that match no known species. They combine features from different plant families in ways that are biologically impossible, as if drawn from imagination or from a catalog of organisms that no longer exist. The astronomical section contains circular diagrams with radial divisions and celestial bodies that some researchers have proposed correspond to medieval European zodiacal charts, while others find no convincing match to any known tradition. A section depicting naked women floating in interconnected green pools connected by pipe-like channels defies any clear interpretation. A pharmaceutical section shows containers and preparations whose contents are unidentifiable. The text's statistical structure is what makes the hoax theory genuinely difficult to sustain. Jorge Stolfi of the University of Campinas published an analysis in 2004 finding that the script's entropy, values, word length distributions, and positional redundancy patterns closely match those of natural languages like Latin or Arabic. The NSA's classified analysis of the manuscript, partially declassified in 2002, reveals that the agency's top crypt analysts worked on it during the Cold War and produced no decipherment. The declassified memo by cryptanalyst William Friedman describes the text as genuinely puzzling at a technical level that implies real linguistic structure. In 2019, a University of Alberta team using neural network AI trained on medieval European languages proposed a tentative Hebrew connection for some word root patterns, generating significant press attention and no accepted decipherment. The manuscript passed through the hands of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who reportedly paid 600 gold ducats for it, a sum that implies either extraordinary perceived value or extraordinary perceived importance. It then moved through Prague alchemists, Jesuit scholars, and European nobility before reaching Voynich, suggesting it was considered worth preserving and protecting across 3 centuries by people who could not read it any more than we can. The mainstream view among manuscript scholars is that the Voynich is a sophisticated forgery or an elaborate constructed language, possibly created in the 15th century by someone simulating an exotic ancient text for sale to a wealthy patron. The plants are invented. The script is either a personal cipher whose key died with its creator, or a deliberate nonsense designed to be convincingly language-like without meaning anything at all. But crafting 37,000 tokens of text that perfectly mimics the statistical signature of a natural language in 1400 CE without information theory, without computational linguistics, is not a forgery. It is a feat of engineered deception that would be extraordinarily difficult to execute even today. And if it is a personal cipher, the creator needed a reason to produce 240 pages of it. The internal consistency of the manuscript sections, the botanical catalog, the astronomical system, the pharmaceutical preparations, implies a coherent body of knowledge, not a performance. Some researchers ask whether the manuscript is not a code at all, but a record, written in a language that was already extinct or marginal when the vellum was prepared. Copied in the early 15th century by a scribe who understood the material was important without being able to read it any better than we can. The plants that match no known species, the astronomical diagrams that correspond to no known catalog. These could represent a tradition from a world that no longer existed when the ink was applied. A book about a lost knowledge system, preserved because someone recognized its value and had no way to explain what it contained. The Voynich manuscript may not be unsolvable because it is a code. It may be unsolvable because the world it describes is gone. And that possibility, that a complete body of knowledge, illustrated and systematic and internally coherent, could be sitting in a Yale library case and be as inaccessible to us as if it had burned, is perhaps more disturbing than any cipher. From an impenetrable text, we move to an event so large it is written in our DNA, a catastrophe that nearly ended our species and the question of who or what survived it alongside us. The Toba catastrophe and the impossible survivors picture the worst day in human history, not a war, not a plague, a volcano. The Toba supervolcano in what is now Sumatra erupted approximately 74,000 years ago with a force that produced an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of volcanic material, roughly 3,000 times the scale of Mount St. Helens in 1980. The eruption triggered a volcanic winter that may have lasted 6 to 10 years, reducing global temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, collapsing plant populations across Eurasia and Africa, and forcing every species on Earth into a survival crisis of almost unimaginable scale. When geneticists looked at the DNA of every living human being on the planet and traced our ancestral lines backward, what they found at that moment in time is the closest our species has ever come to not existing at all. And embedded in the genetic record of the survivors is something that should not be there. Anthropologist Stanley Ambrose of the University of Illinois published the formal argument linking the Toba eruption to a human population collapse in the Journal of Human Evolution in 1998, synthesizing geological evidence of the eruption with population genetic analysis. The human mitochondrial DNA bottleneck, the compression of maternal lineage diversity to a founding population, had been documented across multiple studies since the 1980s. Various analyses have placed the post-Toba founding population at between 10,000 and 15,000 individuals globally, with some estimates suggesting the effective breeding population may have been as low as 2,000 to 3,000 at its narrowest. We were, in genetic terms, functionally extinct. All 8 billion people alive today descend from a group smaller than a modern town. Then the complication. In 2010, Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published the Neanderthal genome in Science and found that people of non-African ancestry carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, requiring at least one confirmed interbreeding event between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals after the bottleneck. In 2012, the Denisovan genome showed an additional 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA in Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian populations. A 2014 Nature study by Nielsen and colleagues identified a specific Denisovan gene variant, EPAS1, active in modern Tibetan populations, providing measurable physiological advantages at high altitude, direct evidence that archaic hominin DNA is still doing functional work in living people. These were other species, not other ethnic groups, not other populations of Homo sapiens. Separate species separated from our lineage by hundreds of thousands of years of independent evolution. They should have been ecologically devastated by Toba and the climatic collapse that followed. And yet the genetic evidence tells us that they survived long enough, in sufficient numbers, in specific geographic locations, to encounter our ancestors and leave lasting biological traces in every person alive in large parts of the world today. In 2019, a study published in Cell by Browning and colleagues identified evidence of a third archaic hominin lineage in West African populations. Genetic traces from a species that has never been identified by any fossil in any excavation anywhere. A ghost population. It interbred with Homo sapiens in Africa and left nothing above ground except its genes, still active in millions of living people. The mainstream scientific position on all of this is clear and well supported. The interbreeding events were geographically specific and limited. The Neanderthal admixture occurred in the Levant, the Denisovan in Southeast Asia, each representing a small number of encounters between anatomically modern humans expanding out of Africa and archaic populations still holding territory in specific regions. The survival of these populations through the Toba aftermath is explained by geographic distance from the eruption center and regional ecological resilience. This is the scientific consensus, and it is based on real and robust evidence. But the ghost population has no fossil record. None. Not a tooth, not a jaw fragment, not a fragment of bone from any excavation. We know it existed only because its genes are still running in living bodies. That means there was at least one human species that lived alongside us, contributed to our biology, shaped our genetics, and left nothing in the ground that anyone has ever identified. If one species can disappear from the fossil record so completely while persisting in our DNA, the fossil record is not an inventory of who was here. It is an inventory of who left bones in places we happen to dig. The number of archaic hominin species whose traces survive in modern human genetics is currently at least 3. Some researchers now ask openly, how many more are hiding in the genome, from chapters of human prehistory so thoroughly erased by time that nothing remains above ground, waiting for us to think to look inside ourselves. And from that vast invisible history, we descend to one small object in a Cairo museum. It fits in one hand. It was found in a box labeled wooden bird models, and it knows something about aerodynamics that it has no right to know. The Saqqara bird. In 1898, an Egyptian archaeologist named Khalil Messiha was cataloging artifacts from a tomb at the Saqqara necropolis, the vast burial complex south of Cairo that holds structures from nearly every era of Egyptian history. He was working through a box labeled wooden bird models. Geese, hawks, the standard decorative bird figures of Egyptian funerary art, flat-winged, naturalistic, anatomically correct for their species. Then he picked up one that was wrong. The tail was vertical. No bird in nature has a vertical tail fin. The wings were not flat. They curved slightly in cross-section like an airfoil. And the note found in the same context, written in ancient Egyptian hieratic script, said, "I want to fly." He set it down. He did not know what to do with it. It sat in storage for 70 years before anyone tested it. The artifact is carved from sycamore wood, measures 14.2 centimeters in wingspan and 14 centimeters in length, and weighs 39.12 grams. The tomb of Padi Ayman, where it was recovered, is dated to approximately 200 BCE. Messiha cataloged it in 1898, but it attracted no scientific attention until 1969, when his son, Dr. Khalil Messiha, a medical doctor and amateur archaeologist, retrieved it from the Cairo Museum's storage and presented his aeronautical analysis to the Egyptian Youth Scientific Congress in 1971. The vertical tail fin is the element that stops every aeronautical engineer who looks at it cold. No species of bird, bat, pterosaur, or any other flying vertebrate that has ever existed has a vertical tail fin. It is an exclusively engineered aerodynamic feature. The vertical stabilizer, the upright surface at the rear of an aircraft, prevents yaw, the tendency of a flying body to rotate around its vertical axis. Every fixed-wing aircraft designed by every engineer in the 20th century, working independently in different countries with different traditions, included a vertical stabilizer because without it, controlled flight is essentially impossible. The Sakara bird has one. Nothing in nature does. Arthur Young, an aeronautical engineer who analyzed the artifact in 1979, noted that the wings show a slight camber. Curvature visible in cross-section consistent with a load-bearing airfoil, not the flat surface of decorative wood carving. The center of gravity sits forward of the wing's lifting center, the configuration required for stable gliding flight. In 2006, aeronautical engineer Simon Sanderson built a precision replica and tested it in wind tunnel conditions for a Channel 4 production. The replica generated measurable lift. The team's engineers noted that the addition of a horizontal tailplane, which may have existed as a separate wooden element in the original, now lost, produced stable level gliding flight. Egyptian bird carvings are among the most naturalistic in the ancient world. Egyptian artists documented bird anatomy with documentary precision. The hieroglyphs are species-accurate portraits, many identifiable to genus. To introduce a vertical tail fin into a tradition of meticulous naturalism is not stylization. It is a specific and deliberate departure from naturalism in exactly the direction aeronautical engineering requires. The departure is not random, it is functional. Mainstream Egyptologists classify the Sakara bird as a decorative or ritual object, possibly a votive offering or a child's toy. The vertical tail fin is attributed to artistic stylization or to a damaged or incomplete original form. The aerodynamic properties, where acknowledged, are considered coincidental. A naturally streamlined shape emerging from competent wood carving without aeronautical intent. The inscription "I want to fly" is interpreted as a prayer for the soul's ascent after death, standard in Egyptian funerary aspiration. But Egyptian tombs are filled with functional objects, model boats that the soul would ride across the underworld, model grain stores to feed the deceased, model tools to work with. The objects are not random symbols. They are miniature versions of things that do real work, placed in the tomb because the dead will need them. Some researchers ask whether the Sakara bird is a scale model in that same tradition, not a flying craft itself, but a representation of one. A functional diagram of a vehicle placed in a tomb alongside a note that says "I want to fly," not as poetry, but as intention. What makes this interpretation impossible to simply dismiss is the vertical tail fin. You cannot accidentally know something that does not exist in nature. The stabilizer is not a decorative flourish. It is an engineering solution to a specific problem of physics. Someone at some point understood that problem and solved it. Whoever that person was, they lived at the very latest 2,200 years ago. Yeah, and then their knowledge went into a box, got labeled wooden bird models, and sat in storage for 70 years waiting for someone to notice it was wrong. Pull back now. Look at all 10. A buried temple that predates civilization by 6,000 years. A mechanical computer with a 1,400-year gap in its legacy. Skulls that are the wrong volume and the wrong anatomy. A bracelet made by a species discovered only 15 years ago. Clay nursing mothers with the faces of lizards, erased from every record the moment writing begins. 24 carved underground cathedrals that 5,000 years of Chinese history never mentions. Desert geoglyphs visible only from the air, still hiding new figures from researchers a century after their discovery. A manuscript that has defeated every codebreaker, analyst, and AI system that has ever attempted it. The genetic fingerprints of species who should not have survived still running in your cells. And a wooden bird with a vertical tail fin that should not have existed for another 2,000 years. These are not 10 separate anomalies, they are 10 points on the same pattern. The official story of human history describes a straight line, from caves to cities, from flint to steel, from superstition to science, each generation building on what the last one left behind. It is a satisfying story. And for most people, it is enough. They walk through museums, read the placard, and move on. But the evidence in this list keeps pulling in a different direction. Not toward conspiracy, not toward any single dramatic explanation, but toward a more uncomfortable possibility. That the arc of human knowledge is not a line. That civilizations have risen to heights we cannot account for and then collapsed, by catastrophe, by deliberate choice, by the slow erosion of transmission, leaving fragments behind. A mechanism in a shipwreck, a bird in a storage box, a bracelet in a layer of sediment 50,000 years deep. The next civilization inherits the territory, finds the fragments, cannot read them, and starts again. Mainstream science has answers for each item on this list, and those answers deserve to be heard with full seriousness. Convergent innovation explains parallel technologies. Population collapse explains genetic bottlenecks. Ritual practice explains skull modification. Administrative gap explains missing records. These are not dismissals. They are genuine scientific positions built from genuine evidence by researchers who have spent careers on these questions. The honest position is that we do not know enough to choose definitively between the official story and the alternative one. What we know is that the evidence at these 10 sites does not settle comfortably into either. What connects every item in this list is a single question. What happened to make them stop? Not how did they build it? Not how did they know it? What happened that required the knowledge to be buried, the records to go dark, the technology to vanish for 1,000 years, the language to become unreadable, the species to leave no bones? That question does not have a textbook answer. It has 10 data points spread across 5 continents and 60,000 years, all pointing at the same silence. Most people walk past that silence. You sat with it. You followed every one of these finds to the edge of what the textbooks allow and kept looking. That is not a conspiracy instinct. It is the foundational impulse of every genuine scientific revolution in history. The refusal to accept that the official answer is the complete one. This channel exists because that refusal deserves a place to think. Hit subscribe and make it your home base. And now, go to the comments. Tell me which single item from this list you believe is the smoking gun. The one that cannot be explained away no matter how hard you try. Build your case. Convince the rest of us. The floor is yours. Here is what the evidence, taken all together, actually says. We are not the first draft of this story. The bracelet in the Siberian cave, the computer in the Roman shipwreck, the bird in the storage box. They are not curiosities. They are messages from a version of human history that did not survive intact. Every civilization that came before us left something just large enough to endure, just strange enough that we could not ignore it, just incomplete enough that we could not fully read it. The question was never whether someone was here before us. The question is whether we are paying attention this time. Something is asking to be remembered. Subscribe, and don't look away.